Hello again YouTube, Pan here, and you join me on a hot summer night. And I am actually recording this video having just switched off the air conditioner, and so the challenge is going to be to try and get this video recorded before the room becomes unbearably hot. And that's going to be particularly challenging because I want to talk about quite a bit this week. In fact, this week's topic features a combination of history, geography, numismatics, and even a bit of philosophy. So, without further ado, what have I actually got in the purse this week? It's Japanese Mon. So, before we get looking too closely at the coins themselves, I'm going to give a little bit of background, which is going to be important, and particularly for looking at why these coins here are so different to this big lumpy one over here. And it all begins in China, as so many things do. So, let's pull out our atlas of the world. Now, China, for many, many centuries, particularly in the Far East and generally, frankly, for a lot of the world, was the cultural hub, was the most advanced, most sophisticated place, and anybody who has even a passing familiarity with Japanese history will be aware of the fact that Japan essentially copied most of its culture, most of its important cultural elements from China. The state religion being Buddhism kind of travelled to the Far East, from India through China, eventually to Korea and Japan. The Japanese writing system is essentially cribbed from the Chinese writing system, albeit, kind of copied phonetically, and then the two have kind of diverged over time. Things like bonsai and the tea ceremony and lots and lots of other things that often we think of as being quintessentially Japanese are actually have older, slightly different Chinese precedents. And one of the most important ones for our consideration is the foundation of most Far Eastern societies for many, many hundreds of years, Confucius and Confucianism. Now, Confucianism is commonly taken as being a sort of school of philosophy, and it's definitely more kind of philosophy than it is religion, I would say. It doesn't particularly concern itself with the afterlife, and is much more focused on creating a functional and, most importantly, stable society in the here and now. So an awful lot of its core beliefs are leading by example, filial piety, honouring one's elders, one's parents, and things like that. Now, an important thing to bear in mind about Confucianism is that Confucianism isn't necessarily about making a particularly prosperous society, or necessarily a particularly advanced or complicated one. What Confucianism is really, really hot on, however, is making a stable society. And so, through a lot of the Far East, what we saw for many, many hundreds of years was a state of basically very, very low inflation. How low? Well, these coins, basic Japanese Mon, were originally Chinese coins. They were brought over from China because China made them and people in Japan used them. And they remained essentially unchanged for, again, hundreds of years throughout most of the Edo period. And the Edo period is a several hundred years long period of relative peace and also relative isolation in Japanese history, leading right up into the Meiji Restoration at the end of the 19th century. So first of all, we have what are essentially a couple of one-mon pieces. And these will have the name of the mint where they were made and the name of the period that they were minted in. So we'll have like the name of the emperor on them. I've tried to look these up, but unfortunately Wikipedia's list of references is not exactly exhaustive for these. Now what is really interesting is you can see that they've basically done two different lines of text. One is top to bottom and the other is left to right. And so if you look very closely at these, you can see that the leftmost symbol on both of these two coins, whilst slightly different in terms of its stylization, is the same character, and the same for the one on the right. Whereas the ones top to bottom are different and will mean that these were from different periods. What you'll also get is you'll get sometimes on the back of them, either the back will be completely plain as it is on this one on the right, or there'll be effectively a mint mark indicating where it was made, as we see on this one on the left. Other things worthy of note, you can see they've got these square holes in the middle, and that's from the odd idea that what you would do is you would string them together. And actually, merchants would sometimes offer a discount if you paid in like a nicely tied up string of coins, rather than them having to faff about counting individual tiny little copper pieces. So these are copper, and actually, effectively for most of the Edo period, Japan ran on what was basically a trimetallic system. There was a set specification for how many mon, these lowest denomination coins, equaled a certain silver currency, and then a certain number of the silver currency equated to the gold ones. And the gold ones came in both as like these tiny little rectangles and then koban, and koban are absolutely gorgeous, great big sort of oval, almost like kind of shell shapes. I'll see if I can slip in a photo here of them because they're really beautiful. I had the opportunity to hold a couple and have a look at them when I was in Japan, but yeah, the price of them is really quite stunning. So these are 1 mon pieces, and you can see certainly that this one is definitely in much better nick than this one. I haven't been able to date them accurately. Again, Wikipedia has let me down without having an exhaustive set of images for all the different coins, and my Japanese isn't good enough to recognise the characters, so that's something for future research. But moving up from the 1 mon, we then have a 4 mon. So first up, you can see that this one is significantly larger. Both got a bigger hole and a bigger circumference. And again, we have markings on the front denoting the emperor and the value of the coin. And also, curiously, a lot of the 4 mon on the back, instead of having a mint mark, they have this sort of ripple pattern of waves. It's really quite nice. I'm really quite fond of that. And certainly it's interesting to compare these to Western coins, where we consider very normal to have both the obverse and reverse of a coin very busy in terms of the amount of text and the amount of information they carry. Whereas having a reverse basically either completely blank or with just a very simple minimalistic aesthetic pattern on it is quite an interesting touch. So these were all around for hundreds of years, basically without change. And what that means is that for hundreds of years, Japan essentially went without any real noticeable inflation. Again, look at Confucianism as being, this cheat code for how to make a very stable, i.e. a society where not a lot changes. So yes, you have improvements and developments, and society does change over time, but you don't have a huge amount necessarily of economic growth. Again, the Edo period was brought over by the kind of elite samurai class, which basically meant that it's great if you're a samurai, it kind of sucks if you're the 80% of the population who isn't. Now this piece, a Tenpo Shuho, as the name for this kind of coin goes, is a very different piece altogether. So the value of this is 100 mon, and you don't have to be a particular expert to see that it's not 100 times bigger than a 1 mon piece. In fact, some estimates go that actually these have got more like half a dozen to a dozen times the amount of material as you had in a 1 mon piece. So these were really much more a fiat rather than a weight-based metal value. And these were introduced really quite late on in the Edo period. These were introduced basically, I think, about 20 or 30 years before the Meiji Restoration, which, in terms of that period of history, is right towards the end. And one of the things that happened when you suddenly have the shogunate issuing coins with a face value much, much higher than their intrinsic metal value is you get quite hefty inflation. And inflation was something that was going to then impact Japan quite hard for quite a while. It went through several periods of quite hefty inflation. In fact, during the Meiji Restoration, when they moved over from using Mon and gold kobans and silver coins, when they moved over to having a standardized yen, originally 1 yen was equivalent to a dollar, a silver dollar, like a Spanish dollar or a trade dollar. So, you know, kind of a little under an ounce of 900 pure silver. Yes, I looked to see if I could get one in Japan. No, I couldn't afford them because they are there's a pretty hefty premium on them. But they are quite pretty, and I definitely want to get one for my collection at some point. So the Tenpo Shuho was really kind of a sign of things changing, and in many ways kind of a sign of the beginning of the end. So the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate of the Edo period, didn't really outlast several pretty hefty disasters that happened. Essentially, it was a combination of sort of economic difficulties and natural disasters, some droughts, some famine, and basically people got kind of, you know, a bit fed up with it, and then they started saying, well, maybe we should actually go back to, you know, actually having the emperor as being somebody important, and that's sort of what led into the whole Meiji Restoration. So this is a really interesting coin in that it's from a quite small window in history when things were just on the cusp of changing really quite dramatically. Also, incidentally, these were, whilst there were some kind of imitations of these minted by local lords, local daimyo, most of the actual original official ones were minted centrally and then distributed to different regional mints where they would have a mint mark added, and the mint mark was added on the side. There we go, and actually looking at it under the magnifier like that, it looks more like a bird's foot perhaps, or an arrowhead. So there we go. Japanese Mon. Not particularly precious metals, but certainly an interesting handful of coins to add to my collection, with an interesting bit of history behind them too. Oh, one other thing I wanted to add, again, talking about Confucianism. One of the really interesting things about Confucianism is that it has a really, really low opinion of people who don't do anything that Confucius considered important. So, the most important people under a Confucian ideal were the people who made stuff. So farmers were really super freaking important. Priests were important. Artisans were important. And the lowest tier of society, the people that Confucianism basically said, you know, you're kind of worthless, merchants. It'd be fascinating to think what Confucius would make of an awful lot of the financial services industry these days, wouldn't it? So there we go. Japanese Mon, a bit of Far Eastern history, and a little touch of very, very grossly oversimplified and probably poorly understood Confucianism on my part. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to hit subscribe if you want more of my ramblings on this kind of topic. And I will see you all bright and early next Friday lunchtime. Alright, bye for now.